Our first speaker, coming from the right corner of the room today, has more than 2 decades of experience in digital marketing, working with data across a multitude of brands. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming renowned digital marketing consultant Lenssen to the stage.
I've never come onto that music before.
Welcome, Lewis.
Thank you.
And in the left corner, with 10 years of digital marketing experience across a number of digital marketing agencies, now our Director of Digital Strategy at NMPi, please welcome Damien Bennett. So gentlemen, the stage is yours. The subject is attribution really worth it? I'm going to invite Lewis to open, and Damien, you will follow.
Extraordinary music you chose, Damien. Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome back to the main event. Is attribution worth it? Attribution is the most logical, but sadly the most flawed approach in the marketer's toolkit. Before I kind of get into it, let's make sure that we all know what we're debating. What attribution, because there's lots of things called attribution in digital. We're talking about the process of assigning credit for sales to marketing channels based on some form of analysis of the touch points in the buyer's journey. It's a kind of mouthful, but it's all that stuff about changing from last click wins to implementing some kind of evenly shared decay model, game theory, AI, or anything swanky way of dividing up a sale based on the channels, and I say it will make little or no difference to your business. Now, at this point, I could be accused of being a bit negative, which is definitely not the NMPi way. So what I promise is that I'll tell you a bunch of fail stories, but I'll also give you the killer alternative, what you should be doing. But let's start with the negatives. Fail story number 1. I sold attribution for DC Storm for 5 years. And most of the time, the motivation of the buyer was not to find hidden gems in their data or to transform their digital marketing. No, most of the buyers wanted to prove what they were doing now was right. Or to prove that somebody else in their business who was getting a little bit too much credit was actually wrong. So what happened when the solution was implemented? Well, if the initial numbers fitted the narrative of the buyer, it was happy days. They didn't do anything at all. That was one option. Or in the alternative, where the results didn't fit their narrative, it then became time to start tuning the attribution model. And therein lies the problem. There is no right answer to how to share out the value of sales, and there are plenty of ways that you can cheat to make the attribution model suit your narrative. So the most common attribution project was 6 months of a sale, lots of procurement, 3 months of implementation and tracking, probably only about a week of analysis of the data, and then a horrible, bitter dispute for about 6 months about what the attribution model should actually be. So the end result is a whole load of high costs, a lot of hot air, and absolutely no change in performance or management of any of the channels. I am being quite negative. Fail story 2. What's the big theory behind attribution? I ask people that, and they bang on about 50% of my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. But that's got nothing to do with attribution. The theory behind attribution is that every sale is driven in some way by marketing. Yes, every sale is driven by us, the marketers in this room, and attribution is what tells us which of our amazing channels should be given credit for those sales. Now let's just think about the validity of that, and let's use my wife as an example. My wife buys clothes from Net-a-Porter all too often, every few weeks. Do you think that when she purchases, she's actually being driven to do so by the PPC ad she happens to click on, or the Facebook post she clicks on, or the Instagram post? Is that what's actually driving her sales? Or is it actually the amazing brand loyalty that Net has built? Is it the fact that they've got a fantastic delivery policy, an absolutely flexible returns policy? The fact that when she arrives at the site, the curation is perfect. It's based on all of her previous purchases, her previous searches. It's madness to think that those really real, tangible drivers of purchase are actually not important. It's all about the marketing. That's all that matters. 90% of purchases at Net-a-Porter are made by people who've bought previously in the last year. If our attribution models don't reflect all those real reasons, the real reasons they're going back and buying, and purely look at marketing, then it doesn't matter what model we use, it's all a waste of time anyway. I'll now try and be a bit more positive. What is the right way to go? Well, fortunately, it's not a million miles away from attribution. Yes, you have to track everything. You need to track all of your marketing activities, your websites, your apps, your stores. You need to collect all the data together in one place, and it needs to be in a technology that allows you to analyze it and make sense of it. But here's the big difference. You have to apply your customer segmentation to every sale. You have to know whether that purchase was to my wife, a regular customer. You have to know whether it's to a gold customer, like Luke, who probably spends thousands every week, or to a first-time customer, or even somebody who only shops in the sale, like Damien. Or a present buyer like me. Anyway, whatever the categories, you need to know what they are, and you need to make sense of the data in that context. You need to look at trends, you need to establish hypotheses about what's actually making people buy in those different groups. Marketing has an element of creativity and innovation, and that's what makes it not good fun rather than a science. Great marketers are people who use the technology and data to come up with ideas, hypotheses. They then use it to test it, and they use it to drive them on, to optimize and make things work better. It isn't all about trying to boil everything down to an attribution model that spits out the right answer and you feed it into your automated tools. That's not what it's all about. So I return to my hypothesis. Attribution is very logical, but it's sadly a hugely flawed approach in the marketer's toolkit. I hope that makes some sense, but let's hear Damien in its defense.
I feel like this side of the stage hasn't got much love, so I'm going to move across here. And I asked for some audience participation, because I know that people love that. So if you think that better measurement leads to better marketing decision making, raise your hand. Pretty much everybody in the room. Keep them raised if you answered. Sorry, keep them raised. The power. Keep them raised if you use an attribution model. And keep them raised again if that attribution model is also used by your CEO. And suddenly there was zero. It is amazing. If this debate was to be reframed about whether better measurement led to better media planning and buying and better media optimization, it would be unanimous. Nobody would disagree. Yet the vast majority of advertisers in the UK still use a last click wins model. The last study I saw showed that 70% of advertisers in the UK use last click wins as their main method of reporting. And everybody knows that's flawed. Everybody knows that most customer journeys involve multiple touch points with different media. Everybody knows that people interact with media through more than just clicks. And everybody knows that the last interaction that somebody has with your advertising often isn't the most valuable. So the question is, why do so few people use attribution? And I think the reason why so few people use attribution is because of two factors. The first is that they see it as hugely complex and actually quite scary. They think it's something that requires an army of PhDs, a legion of data scientists to be able to do. And the second reason is because they see it as being something that's hugely expensive, something where the costs can run into the hundreds of thousands of pounds. And we've all heard the horror stories. We've all heard of the business that spent a fortune on a new data-driven attribution model, only to never use it. We all know about the marketing team that went to great lengths to build an attribution model that was then nixed by their CEO or the CFO. So I think the question of this debate is, if we all agree that better measurement leads to better marketing decision making, then is attribution the right solution? And unlike Lewis, I believe the answer is pretty emphatic. It's yes. And I might not have given that answer 12 months ago. But right now, standing here, I think attribution is the best solution. For starters, it solves all of the problems that we see with last click wins measurement. It allows you to look at media that involved multiple touch points. It fractionally allocates, so you're not just looking at the last click. And it also allows us to look at more than just clicks, so that we can look at impressions and views as well. And it's not that complex anymore. If you have the standard version of Google Analytics, you have a model comparison tool within it that allows you to see attributed data. And to that point, it's also not that costly anymore. It's much cheaper and much more cost-effective than it ever was before to be able to do attribution. So I think it's a no-brainer. And I actually think that this debate is a crisis in our industry. The marketing industry goes round and round in circles on topics. And this is the one that's most familiar for me, about whether they should be doing attribution. And you can pick holes in any argument, but surely it's time to take action. Surely we should all be using attribution models, because for every horror story about somebody who's had an issue with attribution, I could tell you 100 stories of advertisers who have exponentially increased the value that they're getting out of their media. I can tell you stories about businesses that have realized that some of the media that they invested in didn't add the incremental value that they thought it was. So really, my message today is, let's stop this wider industry debate. Let's accept that there are simpler, better ways to measure performance, and that the best way to measure performance that we have available to us today is attribution. And it's up to us, to marketers, to really get started with that.